I'm Eva. I am an associate professor in the Counseling and Educational Settings program at Rowan University. I'm excited for this to be the third time of attending this conference. The first one was hosted at Rowan. And I'm excited about the collective of school counselors, supervisors, and district personnel that we have on our team. So we have a lot to discuss. First and foremost, as everyone on this call almost knows, I start every professional development with some assumptions about our audience. And this is the we care, self-care, educare, and that we're here for all students, and that wellness is what keeps us healthy, and the ability to be able to support all students, and that we're all learners. We're going to continue to learn for all of our students as we move forward. So this is who we are, and I'm going to let my panel introduce themselves at this time. Amy, you want to start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Amy Lombardo, and I am a school counselor at the Middlesex County Vocational Technical School. I've been a school counselor now for the past 10 years, and the past 10 years I've been at secondary level working with a diverse group of students, and I just love being a school counselor.
Mm-hmm. They're all looking at me. Keep it moving. Who's next?
I'll go next, Kat. My name is Florence Crawford. I'm an elementary school counselor in the Pensacola School District in South Jersey. So I service students pre-K through third grade.
My name is Nicole Cartwright. I am a school counselor at Englewood Public Schools elementary level. I have 7 years of experience. I've worked at the high school level and also at the elementary level.
Good afternoon. My name is Daisha Henson, and I am currently a school counselor at East Orange Campus High School. I've been a school counselor for about 5 years, have worked from K through 12. I'm also licensed as a rehabilitation counselor and licensed professional counselor in the state of New Jersey.
Hello, everyone. My name is Letitia Little. I am a school counselor at College Achieve Central Charter School in Plainfield. I am a licensed professional counselor as well of the state of New Jersey, and I've been a certified school counselor now for 2 years, but I've been working in the school system for 10.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Grimaldi. I'm the Director of District School Counseling in Washington Township, Gloucester County, and I've been doing this for close to 30 years. I'm excited to share some information just from a central administration standpoint, and I also oversee school climate and culture at the school district, and also past president of the New Jersey School Counselors Association.
Awesome. Thank you. And so we're going to start with what we know about school counseling as of right now, and kind of then how we came to be before we move forward. And we do know that school counseling mirrors the same demographics as the teacher workforce. We are predominantly we are about 75% white and white female specifically. And we know that there are a lot of consequences for that for some of our students, partly because we know that representation matters. I think 3 of us on this call speak Spanish. I don't know about some of our other languages, but we do know that representation matters in building a trusting relationship. And it's really important specifically for school counselors, because there may be only 1 or 2 in a building who are servicing students. And we really are responsible for the interconnection of academic, social, emotional, and career development, but specifically during this moment in time where stress, anxiety, and just the ability to cope comes from counselors specifically. And that's really hard to do when you never see someone who looks like you, to build a trusting relationship to learn those skills. We also know that we have several barriers in our field. One of them currently is the 584 New Jersey school districts, mostly because we do not have state representation or even county representation or even any level of supervision for the most part in some of our schools. Some districts are lucky to have a director of guidance, and they typically only ever see high school. Jen is the exception currently. And specifically in counseling, we do have a lot of what is in our literature as white savior going in to help. And so that doesn't help when looking at the lens of looking at all of our students and strengths and all of kind of their ecological model. We also know that administration next is our largest barrier too, and partly because our field, and we will admit, has evolved and more strategically in the last 30 years, and that administration just doesn't understand what we do. And so then they task us with what they think we should be doing when we might be the only mental health expert in a building. And then we get pulled to be able to do testing. And so we get a master's degree in counseling, and then we're doing administrative duties. And so we also know in that 584 school districts, it looks extremely different. And we also know that schools in and of itself are oppressive, right? And school counseling is no different. We were built on racist practices. We were built as a result of Sputnik and the race to space to get people in STEM. So we essentially ended up as gatekeepers on who can enter higher level courses, and those practices still exist today. And so we actually have to acknowledge that. We already talked about administrative duties, but time would be our next topic. We have some recommended ratios that we're fighting into legislation right now, but it is highly possible that we have 1 student to 700 students in an elementary school. I think, Nicole, you have somewhere around like 500-esque around that realm. And so that's really hard to be able to provide support for all of those students. We are mental health and academic experts, and not many people understand the intersect of those two things. And so we are experts that then don't get to use that expertise and then be able to work with students. And our job, and this isn't our code of ethics, this isn't our competencies, our job is to provide access to opportunities and to remove barriers to do that. And there are multiple ways that we do that to reach kids. Multi-tiered systems of support is one way, data is one part, but one thing about our field is that we are a marginalized field in and of itself in an education system. So we are marginalized in counselor ed, we're marginalized in the educational K-12 system. And so we are trying to cross 2 worlds essentially when we're being trained. And so we are typically one voice in a building. And while our job is to be the loudest voice for students and a student advocate, it doesn't always get perceived in that same way. Oh, see, that was there. And yet we do teach people from a systemic lens. And so we are able to see the whole child, or at least that's what we're trying to implement in all of our programming and education. And then, which brings us to today. We are poised with skill sets for healing engagement and specifically for racial healing. But because of all our barriers and the pandemic specifically right now, we are up against a lot on being able to be able to perform those skills and to be able to interject. And we're going to talk about some of the things that have happened in this last year. And that skill set does rely on a systemic understanding. And so we are moving into this anti-racist school counseling model, but schools aren't necessarily ready for us either, which we'll hear from some of ours from a political nature in general. And so this is what we know. This is what we know is important. So we also know that we need representation. So what does that mean? So this is how all of us came to be. I'm going to first talk about our partnership with Jen, and then the collective, and then our panel is going to share with you. So Jen, when I moved to the state of New Jersey, this is my 11th year, she was president of the New Jersey School Counseling Association at that moment in time. And at that time, Dr. Wilson Hill, who was pictured in this, was actually the other person I was working with as a partner in districts. And our job at that time was really to start increasing the supports we were actually giving to our school counselors of color who are already enrolled in our program, and giving them support and supervision and placing them in predominantly white schools. And that was really strategic on our part. Part of this was retention. And one of the reasons we didn't focus on recruitment at the time was I teach in what I will call college access programs. And for a long time, people would work and have experiences me through the years, and then would come back into our master's program. And so we did, while we're nowhere where we want to be as far as numbers are concerned, we were definitely a different had different numbers than every other program at that moment in time. And so we focused on the retention piece. And for us, it was letting them go into predominantly white schools. And for most of them, it was their first time even being in a predominantly white school as a counselor of color, and then provided supervision. And we're kind of still in that realm today. So that's how Jen and I have been partnering amongst school climate and changing systems for a long period of time. And then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, I said to Jen, we have 584 school districts and they don't know what's happening. No one knows what's happening. No one knows the rules. No one knows anything about virtual counseling. What should we do? So we created an online just collective of individuals in which we ended up providing. We started very early on with consultation and supervision, and then it kind of blossomed and grew. And Amy, who was on this panel, came to us and said, you know what, we have some different issues that we're dealing with in some of our schools. How about we go ahead and start a group for students, particularly from marginalized and underserved communities, which led to most of everyone on this panel showing up weekly. We spent a lot of time together from about April till now, including this summer, and really working on kind of our own understanding of where we were. Florentina was huge in getting our kind of movie and book clubs together, and everyone just kind of showed up, and we've evolved in conversations over a period of time. And that's kind of how we came to be from across the state. And what's important to note is while all this was going on, everyone on this call was planning for what was to be when we entered school. Jen could give you a little bit about that too. But we knew we were coming back as school counselors, already having barriers in and of itself, barriers that we've already faced. There's some that even are prevalent in my head that have been shared from this panel. But we had to respond still to the pandemic and re-entry and what virtual counseling looked like. We have a layer and level of mental health, right? That we already had, we knew were in schools, but is now elevated. And it has turned into not just students. We now have to, we are now coordinating with families and teachers' mental health and well-being, which is more of an added bonus to us. And then we do know from now until the next 10 years, we will see the impact in our world as far as trauma and anxiety is concerned. And so we don't even know what to expect for the next 10 years, but we also know the economic fallout has major implications for all of our students as far as college and career readiness and post-secondary planning. And then simultaneously, as everyone on this call can remember too, our job is also to affirm our students, families, and teachers of color. And we have districts who are not in positions to be able to also do that. So we are in this place where we can't necessarily follow what our administration says because it violates our codes of ethics. And yet we are here to affirm, right, and support our students, yet we're operating in systems that oppress and won't let us do that. And so all of our counselors on here have found a way around systems and navigating them to the best that they possibly can. And most of the time our conversations are about some of that. And so we're going to hear from them. We collectively as a group met to talk about what we would need in order to increase all of our counselors of color, because part of it isn't just about recruitment. Part of it is really about retaining and mentoring. And we don't necessarily see school counselors as first-year teachers. And so they don't typically get the level of mentoring, but that also leads to our largest barrier, which is we do not have clinical supervision, and something we've been asking for a long period of time. Mental health counseling gets it, social work gets it, fields of psychology get it, but school counselors don't. And they're interacting in two totally different worlds. And so we kind of came up with this model together that part of the established university partnership, and everyone in here has a level of experience in some of this, is huge. And part of that is our partnership, my partnership with Jen and her district is ultimately about continuing a layer and level of supervision in PD and involvement after they've left the university. We've also talked about this, and this hasn't happened, but this is something that we strategically need to do across the country, but we really need to be partnering with educational administration because we think before they get out of their certificate programs, they also need to understand our role. There are pipeline programs that exist specifically for teaching, right? And to come into the teaching field, but not necessarily for school counseling and for mental health. And we are really working on ending the stigma for mental health. So we have two barriers when it comes to recruiting students of color. One is the educational experience that may have already caused some sort of layer of just not being good. I'll call it that. And then the other piece, or higher ed experience also. So it could be K-12 and higher ed, but we also have to deal with the stigma of mental health, right? And so those are already two barriers for our counselors who are multiple identities coming in to be able to intersect with both of those. We already talked about clinical supervision. We're working on that. We're working on legislation and lobbying. Our organization is really spearheading that. So we're hopeful. And then we really do believe mentoring at two levels, both at the P12 and university, and to create a partnership. We've attempted to do this with two other school districts as well, where the school counseling supervisors also come and meet with us in class. And the longevity of that is not necessarily come to fruition as far as the practicing counselor wanting to continuously come. And so the partnership with the university and the whole district becomes instrumental in that particular piece. And then the other thing that happens for school counselors, so they have to be up to date, right? Mental health, education, behaviors, new diagnoses, new interventions, new evidence-based research, and new career fields, right? New pathway programs, how to get them in. And yet school counselors still basically receive professional development that all teachers receive. And so then they are left on their own to kind of figure out how they're going to learn all this information. And so some do, right? Because that's who they are. And some don't. And some just only practice what they knew without staying up to date, which is also hurting our students simultaneously. And so we don't think this is a one size fits all. We feel like every one of these things need to be in place in order to help facilitate really bringing in our students of color. And we've also talked about potentially doing in middle school and high school, actually having similar programs like Future Teachers of America, but having future school counselors as a group. And part of that one is group process and group identity. The other part is really ending the stigma of mental health while simultaneously supporting and kind of growing our field, because we are not a direct pipeline program. We are a master's degree and anyone can come from anywhere in order to enter our profession. But we need to be really strategic about that targeting aspect, which brings us to our panel. And we're very excited to hear from them. So we have some questions that they're going to share with you, and you guys can kind of go in order or have a conversation. And then one of the things to touch upon really is what you've gained also from the collective kind of moving forward. And I'm going to let you guys go. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll start. So I actually taught fourth grade in my district for about 13 years before switching over to the school counselor. I think the hardest thing for me was my internship, like fitting that in just as a teacher, but also being under the supervision of a counselor who was not trained with ASCA, who had no idea of the mindsets and behaviors. Really went into classrooms, really did small groups, so it was difficult to change his mindset and say, like, this is what I want to try. Like, why would you want to try that? And I'm like, because this is what we're supposed to be doing as school counselors. We're supposed to be reading those tier 1s and the MDSS and all that data. So I think my teaching experience helped a lot with just giving me that knowledge of how to run small groups, how to manage behaviors, how to do all of those things. And that's kind of like where I am now. I'll hold off on 2, 3, and 4 so that I can give everyone else, I guess, their time to number 1.
Hi, everyone. My name is Letitia Little again, and my pathway was much different. I am not a teacher. I started out in the mental health sector, and I held my LPC for many years before I came into the school sector. And once I got into the school sector and realized that the school sector does not recognize the LPC, which I thought was very interesting because the same the same scholars or students that I would see in the after school program that was there for mental health issues or concerns, those were the same students or scholars that was in your school throughout the day. And to come into the field and not have my license recognized was very discouraging. I wound up having to go back to school in order to take multiple classes in order to get my certification. Not to mention the fact that I had to do a whole nother intern in the school setting, which they didn't recognize any of my clinical hours. But yet I brought such a skill set in running group therapy with the different groups, smaller groups that you would need to run in today's school. And so I thought that was just very interesting, especially when I came to this group to discuss that and be able to, for individuals to say, wow, you know, that's something that's not even really kind of thought about. So I think that for me, the pathway was a struggle, but yet I'm glad that I was able to have that struggle. So hopefully I can make it better for those that are coming behind me.
Good afternoon. I guess I'll share, and just to piggyback on what Letitia has stated, you know, my experience, I tell people I've taken the scenic route because I started off as a rehabilitation counselor, and then found out that the program I was in was not KCREP accredited. Actually had to go back to school to take a series of classes to become licensed as a professional counselor. However, I've always worked with young people. I've always worked with students, and having that experience of working in a crisis center, working in a rehabilitation center, working at the youth shelters of Middlesex County, the juvenile detention center, I realized that if I could meet these students in the school, perhaps I could help with them not ending up in these different places or these different settings. So as a result, I went back to school to become a school counselor. And I would just say, in regards to even my skill set, having that mental health, having that rehabilitation counseling experience has definitely helped me to be a better and more effective and efficient school counselor now. So that has been my experience.
Hi, everyone. So my pathway, I was, my bachelor's degree was in psychology. I started first working first in a special needs school where I started working with as a teacher aide. And then I gradually went in working in as a CMO worker, as a care manager, working with students, getting referral services. And I noticed that there was a disconnect between the community services and the school. Just with my experience where I had it, where I was a care manager going into the school district, there was that disconnect where there was no proper communication, no opportunities for the student, for the parents to have that engagement with the school, plus the engagement with the community. So that was something that I found missing. So as a care manager, I felt like the need and the experience that I wanted was in a school setting. I feel like what was missing in my group was that the lack of communication and support for parents as well. I feel that most of it was always engaged with the students, but, you know, we as school counselors, we're working holistically with students, the parents, you know, so that was my, what I felt like I was missing, just not that connection of, you know, you're working with the child, but, you know, the parent plays a vital role, and not enough representation with parents where they need a little bit more training. Especially with who I work with. I work as a bilingual school counselor. I speak Spanish, so I always feel like just getting parents more engaged in the education. School districts are not doing enough for that. And I just feel like that has been like a big key for me, is that community engagement, but also getting parent involvement as well.
Hello, my name is Nicole Cartwright, and as I shared earlier, I'm an elementary counselor now. My pathway into school counseling was similar to Amy's, but I became a teacher. I was a teacher in the middle school for 6 years, and in the same district. And I started to see that a lot of my students ended up being in the newspaper, and I kept seeing mugshots. And so I asked my principal, I'm like, this has to stop. This is not okay for me we're missing something. And so students would ask me, can I stay with you during lunch? And can I stay after school? So eventually my principal was like, you're not their counselor. And I said, you know what, you're right. So I looked into becoming a school counselor, but I did it a little different. I actually moved to the state of Colorado. And yes, it was a K-CRIP accredited program, which I'm grateful for, because when I moved back to New Jersey, I was able to use that. One of the things that I've been missing in terms of as a school counselor has been additional counselors. As Kara shared, I'm currently have 551 students on my caseload. So it's hard to do. And that affects my families and my students, because I am a bilingual counselor like Amy. I speak Spanish, and the population that I work with is mostly Latino and African American. So all of the needs, especially the ones in Spanish, it takes a long time. And you also have the barriers that a lot of the families may or may not know how to use computers, especially now with virtual learning. So just teaching them that through this process has been a lot. And I can definitely say that I have received a lot of support from my building principal. He's like, you're the professional, you know what to do, go with it. So I have been able to do what I need to do, but it's just hard being the only person in the building.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Grimaldi. As I mentioned earlier, central administrator. And my pathway into school counseling started many, many years ago, when you had to be a teacher prior to being a school counselor. Now, I knew that I wanted to go into school counseling, but my pathway was teaching first. I really found that to be a great experience. I was an elementary special education teacher. I was able to work in Title I schools. And then I had that exposure to families and very, very, needy situations that I was spending a lot of time with families, not just the individual student in the classroom. So while I was teaching, I went back to school, to graduate school, and I continued pursuing school counseling. I had experience, middle level, high school level, but I always look at it, I always approached it differently. I found that my colleagues, I was always looking for what more can I do and how can I layer more assistance. Even now as an administrator, I try to figure out, what do we need to provide transportation? Do I need to offer technology? Can I offer fee waivers? Can I even pay for AP exams or dual credit for students? So I'm always looking at it differently. And I even developed our job description for a school counselor and looking at that through a social lens. And that's the recruitment that I look for in the district. I want a diverse group of people who can understand and be empathetic and really can put themselves in other people's shoes and situations.
Kara, you're on mute.
Ooh, sorry. So we have, like, what I was saying was 16, I'm going backwards, I promise. Like 16 minutes. And so I feel like I'm going to ask this question and we'll go backwards. And Jen, start with you. I think we collectively as a group talked about obviously all the challenges we have gone through, sort of the pandemic, but like you all said, we talked about your pathways and things that we want to do kind of moving forward. But I guess what I would ask is, we're going to do our counseling question, kind of the miracle question. And it's both that what barriers would you need removed in order to be able to create places and spaces where we are, what I'll say, appeal as a profession to counselors who are multilingual, multi-ethnic, and of color. We need everyone. We need a lot more diversity. And so kind of what would that look like for you? And Jen, just I'm gonna have you start because you're in the political ramifications of trying to remove barriers, what that is like from an upper administration standpoint, just to start with, and then we'll kind of work backwards.
Certainly. Everything that I look at, whether it's a document, it's a policy, something that regulates our school and school district, I'm really have an analytical eye when it comes to anything that could potentially create barriers, right? So I want to be able to remove whatever that is, to make things all inclusive for staff members, for students, for families. So just looking at it differently, not continuing with a status quo, really defying that status quo. And I also look at, what can other people bring to the table? What other new ideas, some innovative thoughts, programming, new curriculum. I just had all my counselors in my SACs this past summer develop that, but also look at it differently. We're not just meeting the white middle class group, where we need to be expansive in what we're offering. And that's what I mean about really defying that status quo. So we're not going to continue with what we're accustomed to, right? We're going to break through those barriers, and even if people are uncomfortable with it, that's okay. We can all learn and grow together. So professional development certainly has enhanced that. Working with Dr. Aiva with Rowan University, I even run the school climate related climate and culture in the district, the equity council as well. I mean, these are really in the forefront of what we're doing and what we need to include in our districts. I just hope that everyone else, can look at it differently and look at these documents and handbooks and information that we're using that isn't necessarily the best avenue, that there's other ways to do things better.
And Jen, before we leave you, because you Pollyanna this for me, and so I'm going to take you out of that. They don't know, right? People don't know how many hits that you take a day in order to even just get things removed. So I'll say our job's to remove barriers. A lot of times we use data to do that, and it's a policy, right? And so us as counselors, we have to either go to administration. Your district is lucky that they'll go to you. So I just need you to say it publicly for people that you basically take a lot of hits, and a lot of times you don't win.
That is true.
Okay.
I like to win in the sense that I know things will be better for kids. I know things will be better for families. I do take a lot of hits, but that's okay, because that's my role. And I'm willing to, put my neck out and be able to do that, because I know the bottom line is I'm doing the right thing. So, and no, I don't always share that behind the scenes of what I have to go through, maybe the struggles or the challenges and the obstacles, but I don't stop. So I'm really passionate about, helping others and making sure that they get everything they possibly can from P to 12.
So barriers. I've had a couple of barriers, but I think the biggest one, if we're talking about retaining counselors, would be just having that additional support. I cannot say it enough, especially having this group allowed that opportunity to just sometimes vent, because you need to vent. You need to have people who understand the same experiences that you're in, the similar experiences, and having that additional support allows you to feel like you're not alone if you are alone in a building. And it also allows you to have to get ideas, because I would hear different things and I'm like, okay, you know what, my district could use that. And so I could advocate for my students because of things that I heard from other people, and just learning how to just again, especially in this season, picking up all the different things to bring them together just to help all of our students.
Kind of to piggyback with what Nicole was saying, there are many barriers. One of the barriers I would have to say is like the communication. Me being the only bilingual school counselor, it makes it more difficult to have to stop what you're doing and assist someone else. But I do have to say that just with my experience with my coworker, he has come out and has learned how to even have simple phrases just to talk to parents. Our offices are right next door, and I'm like, I am so proud of you. He's getting out of his comfort zone. He's trying to use very simple phrases to communicate with parents, and he has seen such a better engagement with students and with the parents. So that is being able to get out of your comfort zone and finding ways to connect. I always tell my teachers and my staff, well, they don't speak Spanish. I'm like, well, have you tried? Google, I have to say with Google Translate, it has come a long way. So finding the tools to be able to show your parents and students definitely gives confidence for that better communication. So I just say that, it's that communication line that you have to really try out. And there are so many support and services out there that you can try to have that. So I have seen this is my third year now here in my district, and the past 2 years I was used more to help out. And I have to say I'm very proud to see that, other people, just for me advocating for myself, but I'm also advocating for our department, and it's really a plus.
Letitia, I know you were going to go next, and I just wanted to mention this. Both Nicole and Amy, I've heard this over and over from you, right? Like, you get the student who is so grateful that you speak Spanish in that moment, because we all know when we're stressed out and we're in trauma, right? We fall back to either our coping skills, right? Whatever they were that developmentally, or our native language. And that's key. If someone's so upset, right, and has so much anxiety, all they want to do is to share that in their native language. And if they don't have someone to facilitate that with, right, then we've also missed that opportunity in school. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. I would totally agree with you. Being in a district that is Latino or basically African American, and not being able to speak Spanish is very frustrating for me. So I can only imagine what it is for the student. I think that if I would have to say a barrier, and I know that, Dr. Ivy, we've talked about how when I went to go for my supervision, I went back to my alma mater. I'm not going to name what that alma mater is, but I went back to that alma mater and said, listen, I need to do an internship in a school setting. And their response to me was, oh, we only have clinical supervisions. So clinical base. So I was like, wow, that's interesting and sad all at the same time, because here it is that I graduated years ago, and yet you're still focused on just that one aspect of clinical supervision. So that meant that I couldn't do it through that alma mater because they didn't have a sector where it was a school counselor base. And so for me, that's a huge barrier. I feel like if you have a school counseling degree, you should have that opportunity to go either path, if not both. So I think that for me is one of the big barriers. The other one I would have to say is that in regards to retaining school counselors, I think advocating for that number of caseload. In no clinical setting would you ever have 425 caseload. And I have that right now. And I'm the only one in my building as a school counselor. And not to mention the other stuff that we have to do. For example, I am now on the schedule to teach social emotional learning. While I'm in class teaching the 18 homerooms, there could be a crisis. Now, who do I turn to? And so that for me is the two barriers. And I think if we change or get some kind of change on those two barriers, I think we would definitely see an increase of not only retaining, but also recruiting school counselors.
Well, and I'm going to parallel process. You literally just named what's happening right now. One, right? You had to go back and pay more money, right? In order to actually enter the school to be a school counselor, to be able to facilitate. And we do that even in not letting people into high honors courses, college prep courses, which then changes the game for them financially in college, which changes the game for them for retention. So all we're doing is mirroring the process that we already see for K-12 students at this level. And then you're right about caseloads, right? Like where's that ever going to come? And so now you're also talking about, we don't have access. We know students, and particularly our students of color, do not have access to mental health. And ultimately we're now denying that in schools. So we're setting up school counselors of potential color, multi-ethnic, and lingual to not want to enter the profession because they didn't have access in the first place. So you literally just summed up all the research right there too.